Good afternoon, good evening. How are you doing, everybody? Actually, it's good morning in China. So my name is Courtney Zietzk, and I'm glad to see you tonight. And my computer just stopped for a second. What's going on here? There it is. Okay. My computer must have been adjusting or something. Okay, how's everybody going tonight? Everybody good? Okay, we're on our fourth class presentation of Adolf Hitler and the rise to power of the German Third Reich. Just a little bit of brief summary of what we've done so far. We have done, remember, we did the end of World War I, where the Treaty of Versailles was discussed and implemented. And as you know, this treaty was extremely unfair to the country of Germany. In particular, that they had lost their military. They were made to pay for everything. And as a result of that, the German economy suffered tremendously. One of the things that was very clear to everybody, that the treaty was very unfair to the country of Germany. Of the 414 clauses within the Treaty of Versailles, which was dedicated specifically to punishing Germany. So the big four met after the war: Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, and Vittorio Orlandi of Italy all met and decided that that's what they were going to do to Germany. The German people and the German government were not represented within the Treaty of Versailles, which made it especially difficult for the German people to accept. As a result of this, the German economy and the German people suffered mightily after World War I. It was a disaster waiting to happen. While all this was happening, as we went over before, a corporal in the German army by the name of Adolf Hitler would rise to power through various maneuverings and political maneuverings, as we've discussed, and he would eventually become the Chancellor of Germany. And only 52 days later, because of manipulation and Nazi propaganda, this is very important, he would become, for all intents and purposes, the, quote, Führer of Germany, and he would become basically the dictator, the Nazi dictator, where he had absolute control over the German economy, the German people, the German military, and the entire German government. Anybody that opposed Adolf Hitler risked summary judgment to be put into prison, concentration camps, or they would simply be eliminated by other means. Not a very pleasant alternative. So the video that I wanted everybody to look at some point, if you can find it, is the rise and the fall of the German Third Reich, which is on YouTube. And if you can get it, I recommend that you do it. In fact, I will go ahead and send this to Miss Annie Pugh, the teacher over there in China, so you guys hopefully could take a look at it. It's a very, very good video, and I recommend that all of my students see this. It's really well done. Okay, so today's class, we're going to be taking a look specifically at the German economy and the rise and continuing power of the German economy and the German government by Adolf Hitler. How did he do this? How was he able to get such a concentration of people to follow him? Well, the first and foremost is that he realized that the German economy was suffering terribly under the Great Depression. Remember, we had not only the World War I ending, which caused great problems, but now we had a Great Depression that happened in the United States in October of 1929. And as a result of that, the German economy suffered even worse, which would begin to really take its toll on the German people. So they needed something to do, and they needed something to do very quickly. Adolf Hitler had all the answers that they were looking for. And the results of what he was doing was quite admirably, it was called the German miracle. And the reason that it was the German miracle was because he did everything he said he could do. He put the German people back to work. Building arms, first thing he did was he built German arms, rebuilt the military, and he was violating the Treaty of Versailles, but he suggested that they didn't violate it because Germany was never a part of the agreement anyway. They were forced to sign it, but they didn't negotiate it. So in Hitler's mind, and the mind now of the German people, they didn't have to adhere to the Treaty of Versailles because they weren't involved in it in the first place. They were simply just made to be punished by it, but they didn't have any part of negotiation with it. Therefore, according to what Hitler had said, they didn't care about it anyway. He was going to rebuild Germany and make Germany a regional world European power again, regardless of what other people in Europe thought or did. And that's exactly what he did. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the first part of this PowerPoint tonight will be how did Hitler turn the chancellorship into a dictatorship by 1934? He did it very quickly. So let's take a look at this. So first and foremost, Hitler gets the chancellorship of Germany. Okay, so we had this thing called the Treaty of Versailles. You can see that. And then that leads to Black Tuesday. Okay, the Black Tuesday was when the US stock market and the world markets crash. This led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. It led to the increasing influence of new political parties that emphasized state control. And this is what is a key part of this. In order to be able to get the people to do what you want them to do, you have to have control over the people through propaganda and through promises that, hey, look at you guys. You may not like the system that we're going to do, but it is going to put food on your table, and it is absolutely going to improve your life because you're going to have a job and you're going to be making money and the economy is going to be getting better. And this is exactly what Hitler was promising. He was screaming his head off about how wonderful the German people are, that the Aryan people are a superior race, and that they deserve to be a better situation because that's what they were born to do. So he had that very, very, excuse me, my phone's buzzing from them. Okay, so what they were doing was he was telling the people what they wanted to hear. Okay, increasing influence through political parties, the state control. They were going to do this if they had to do it right, which basically ended up being total control by the state or a dictator, in this case, Adolf Hitler. Okay, the Depression after the Wall Street crash made many more people vote for the Nazis in 1933. We went over that last time we met, and how Hitler was able to maneuver into getting into the situation where he would become not only chancellor, but dictator. In 1933, von Papen convinced Hindenburg that Hitler should become chancellor, which he did. And as after he became chancellor, remember we looked at the Reichstag fire. This is what essentially would consolidate power to Adolf Hitler. Hitler realized that he had opposition. Now he was simply going to eliminate the opposition by manipulating the Reichstag fire, blamed them, and used propaganda to do it, which Hitler would now become the undisputed, quote, father, Führer of Germany. Okay, the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag building burnt down. A communist was found inside the building. He admitted responsibility. Chancellor Hitler was able to convince people that the communists were trying to take power by means of terrorism. He was able to have the communists banned from the Reichstag. Therefore, that would make him the country's leading political figure. Now, this is also very, very important. When the communists were banned from the Reichstag, Hitler was able to pass and get this thing done for him. Hitler can now rule anyone for 4 years. There is no need to consult the Reichstag. But this was only the beginning. It wasn't just 4 years, it was in perpetuity now. And Hitler would take specific steps to make sure that he would have ultimate power for as long as he wanted. And this is what I was telling you, everybody, before. Remember when all this was happening, what was Germany doing? They were building the Nazi party through propaganda, through all kinds of media, which would grow the military, the SS, by huge numbers. The German Nazi Party grew enormously huge because he was doing something that they wanted to do. He offered them structure, he offered them food, he offered them what amounted to, in their minds, was a better way of life, a brotherhood of the Nazi Party, of the Aryan master race, as it were. Okay, so let's continue. The Enabling Act gave Hitler the power to make his own laws. He banned all other political parties, and any other political parties were considered to be enemies of the state, enemies of the Nazis, enemies of the fascist party. If you knew what you, the propaganda in Germany, everybody, was that if you knew what is good for you, you will join the Nazi party, because if you don't, that must mean you're against us, you're against the German people, and that you're an enemy of the state, and enemies of the state are dealt with very harshly. This was a master stroke of propaganda. Okay, political prisoners were put in concentration camps run by the SS, as we just discussed. Political prisoners were dealt with extremely harsh. And this would bring something even more devastating, and we will get to that when Hitler was dealing with his political enemies. Now he would be starting to deal with his religious enemies, and this would involve the Jewish people. Okay, the Night of Long Knives. Now I have got rid of the opposition political groups. Now I can deal with opposition in my own party. Ernst Röhm, an old friend, head of the SA, is very unpopular with the German army leaders, and they have the power to overthrow me. I'd be worried about Röhm for a while, so this is a good excuse. So Hitler understood who his political enemies were and how to deal with them. Okay, Hitler had to get rid of Röhm. He was too much of a threat. On the night of the 30th of 1934, June, Hitler's SS killed over 1,000 of the SA members, including Röhm, and the army was well pleased because now they have Hitler was now the undisputed head of the army and the military. And as a result of that, who could possibly get in his way now? He eliminated his political enemies, his military enemies. Now he would be dealing with his religious enemies. Interesting thing about Adolf Hitler is that he hated the Jewish people. Obviously, that's been well documented all throughout history. But he had one more hurdle to go, and that would be the old president of Germany, in which case this would be done for him. The death of President Hindenburg. President Hindenburg's death gave Hitler the opportunity to combine the role of chancellor and president, and now he would be called the Führer, the father of Germany. Okay, so we're building Germany. The oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. If you were anywhere in Germany in 1934, you would go to these massive political rallies all over the Deutschland. One in particular was the one in Nuremberg. This has been well documented. There was over 750,000 people that would take the oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler in just this one event. This was a stroke of masterful propaganda. It was, in fact, I actually have the movie of that within the German Third Reich. Anybody would like to see it, you can certainly see it on YouTube, but it was a masterstroke of propaganda because it showed people that were giving their loyalty freely and that they were giving their loyalty for a purpose greater than themselves. In fact, that was a big part of the Adolf Hitler's pull to people, was that he and his followers were willing to do anything to further the cause of not only their political of Nazi Germany, but they were doing it for the lives of the future of Germany, the young people, which would be brought into the Nazi party, as it were, over the course of their lives. This was not only just a political whim, this was a movement that involved most of the people in Germany. Now, when I say most of the people in Germany, it's very important you understand something there, because not everybody was agreeing to what Hitler was doing. Many of the intellectuals, and of course many of the Jewish people, were scared to death because they didn't realize, or actually they did realize, what path are they going down. Many people were realizing that Hitler's probably going to take them into war, even though he said that they weren't, but they were concerned because what's the first thing Hitler did when he became absolute ruler and Führer of Germany? Immediately, he would rebuild the military as fast as he absolutely could. Now, by doing that, by rebuilding the military, what does that do to German employment numbers? It goes way, way up. When you employ people to rebuild their country's military, you're employing people by the hundreds of thousands. In fact, in this case, millions of people were put back to work almost immediately in Germany. And this was a very important point. When people are going back to work, what do people do when they go to work? They make money. What do you do, class, when you make money? You go shopping. You go out and buy stuff that you need, like food and clothing and new, whatever you need for your house. But the main thing is you're making money. You're putting food on the table and you're making a difference in the lives of millions of people. When the people started to realize that their lives were getting better and better and that they could do stuff again, all of a sudden Hitler became a hero. And this is why they call it the German economic miracle of the early 1930s. The rest of the world, almost, especially the United States and the rest of parts of Europe, they were experiencing a Great Depression. The German economy was soaring because of what Hitler was doing. Massive public works projects, massive military buildup equals people going to work and people making money, thereby growing the German economy up. Okay, let's take a look at this. Okay, we did this. Hitler became chancellor, the Reichstag, the enabling, the night of long knives, death of the president of Hindenburg, now the oath of loyalty to Hitler. And this would lead to Adolf Hitler becoming the undisputed leader of Germany. Okay, the military state. Now, this is where it gets a little bit dicey. And when I mean that is because when Hitler would become absolute ruler, he also made a very, very powerful military state, the Nazis. And what do we got here? We got the Gestapo, Hitler's secret state police, which would enforce and ensure loyalty to the Führer. The SS, the Defense Corps, the Black Shirts, an elite guard unit formed out of the SA. Again, they would enforce Hitler's policies of enforcement or as of loyalty to the SS and to the German people. Okay, we had the SA stormtroopers, what they called the Brown Shirts, the early private Nazi party that protected leaders and opposed political rival parties. We had the living space concept that emphasized the need for territorial expansion of Germany into the east. This was done because of what happened after World War I. Remember the Treaty of Versailles. It absolutely stripped Germany of a lot of its territory. Besides of all the conditions that were unfair to Germany financially, it also took Czechoslovakia and it took Austria. Didn't like that. Okay, the Wehrmacht, German army, Hitler Youth. Hitler actually formed his own youth camps army for children to be loyal to the state of Nazi Germany. And they actually had youth camps, like little military, I guess you could say military camps for children to be loyal to the state. In fact, most 11-year-old boys were taken from their families at 11 years old so they could be in the Hitler Youth Camp. And this was done by a masterstroke of propaganda. This would ensure that the survival of the SS, the Nazis, and would continually, perpetually strengthen Hitler by being the Führer. Now he's going to go after young people for their undivided support. And they had unfortunately, the Einsatzgruppen, which was the Nazi death camps, mobile killing units for people who were against Hitler. These were mainly for gypsies and dissident Jews. And we're going to talk a lot about that when we get into this. Okay, and then we had the Volk, all-inclusive concept of nation, people, and race, implying the superiority of the German people and their culture. Remember, I talked about this before. This was a very, very important part of their propaganda empire, of how they would do this. The people, the race, the nation of Germany is a superior race. Therefore, it is entitled to everything that the German people could ever want. As long as Hitler is in charge, he will be ahead of that group or this race of people that are striving for perfection and worldwide domination. This is what was going on inside of these people's minds. They were being manipulated through threats, propaganda, rewards, and fear of anything else, that they were a part of something that was growing, that now that couldn't ever be stopped. In fact, Hitler would even have what they called Hitler's brides. These were unwed young German girls that had given themselves to Germany and Hitler through their supreme sacrifice, as it were, to the Fuhrer. They would not be killed, but they would be selectively bred to German boys, which would have this master super race of people. It's incredible to understand that the most people in the outside of Germany didn't really know what was going on here. It's amazing what these people were being forced to do through very selective propaganda. Okay, high nationalism and parades. These were going on all over Germany. This was part of the propaganda scheme that would cement Hitler as the undisputed ruler of Germany, and also the fact is that people would have these incredible rallies, as you can see here. Look at all the people in this thing. These were all this was one rally. This was probably the Hitler loyalty of oath rally in Nuremberg. There's hundreds of thousands of people in this thing, and these were going on all the time. Amazing. The unity that they had produced by the German people. This was a masterstroke of what Hitler was really good at. And he would go on and give these huge political speeches about how great Germany is and what these people deserve. Okay, this is where it gets a little bit ugly. We had book burnings. Any political opposition or idea or non-approved religious activity was dealt with severely. You had to have absolute loyalty to your Führer and to the country of Germany. If you didn't, you were in very, very big trouble. Everywhere you had to go, you'd have to have the Nazi salute. And if you did not salute the Führer, everywhere you went, you were questioned and you were checked. And they would ask you, why didn't you salute your Führer? Maybe you forgot. Doesn't make any difference. You don't forget to salute the Führer. Massive book burning parties. This was done specifically to keep the people in mind. You're a one-minded people. You owe everything, your life, your future, everything to Hitler. He used this propaganda, posters, news reports, pictures of Hitler, massive parties, massive parades, everything. And everything that he was doing, everything that he said was for the glory of Germany, for the glory of the German people. He would martyr the people that would die for the party, and he would persecute the people that would even show the slightest inkling to criticize it. Hundreds, if not thousands, of maximum security concentration camps during this period of time were being set up around Germany. They would sterilize people who were not perfect German Aryan blood, or they would simply deport them. Interesting thing, class, and this is very, very important you understand this. Hitler himself was not a true German citizen. In fact, Adolf Hitler was actually born in the country of Austria. Interesting note. Okay, now we start looking at, we start looking at the Jewish people. How are these people perceived in Germany, and why are they considered a threat? Nazi propaganda under poster reads, "Behind the enemy powers are the Jew." They were blamed for everything. The eternal Jew depiction of a Jew holding gold coins in one hand and a whip in the other. Under his arm was a map of the world with the imprint of the hammer and the sickle. Posters like this promoted a sharp rise in anti-Semitic feelings, and in some cases, violence against the Jewish community. In fact, this not only inspired violence, it was a reality that it actually caused it. Signs were going up all over Germany saying, "Jews are not welcome here, go home." People at this beginning of time, the people in Germany that were Jewish people started to get a whole lot nervous, and many started to flee the country en masse because they realized that if they stick around, they could be in some very serious trouble. And they were right. Okay, and the youth. These were the Hitler's brides, all these young girls here, and the youth camps for all the boys. And this was all set up to swear their eternal allegiance to the Jewish, to Adolf Hitler. And this was something that was going on all over Germany. Interestingly enough, class, is that if you didn't join the Hitler Youth or the Hitler Brides or any of these other activities that the Nazis were sponsoring for the glory of Germany, you would be considered a traitor. Your parents were probably questioned and may have been put in jail. In fact, young people were actually kept in these camps, and if the parents tried to go pick them up to take them home, they were told, no, they belong to the Führer now. They're no longer your children. They belong to Adolf Hitler. And if you dare try to take these children, that means you are against the Nazi Party, you are against Adolf Hitler, therefore you will be eliminated. This is what actually was happening, class. No joke. This is what actually was happening in Germany. Keep something in mind, everybody. While all this was going on, this consolidation of power with Hitler, all these people doing all these things, they were rebuilding Germany, they were doing all these things, very quietly, within the German nation, they were becoming a very, very powerful economic country. They had some fabulous economic achievements during this period of time. And the next part of what I'm going to show you today are these economic achievements. Let's look at another PowerPoint, and I think you'll understand and at least appreciate what Hitler was actually trying to do. And the reason I say appreciates is because what he had done was almost a miracle in achievement. Let's take a look at this. Okay, the economy under the Nazis. This is very, very good. Okay, we will learn about the three major problems facing the German economy. The international debt was skyrocketing because of the Treaty of Versailles. There was no agricultural capability because we had agricultural stagnation of the German nation. And we had industrial unemployment. This is before Hitler would become chancellor and undisputed leader of Germany. Now we're going to look at the nature of the problem, the policies adopted by the Nazis to deal with it, and the success of these policies, because quite honestly, class, this was a masterpiece by Adolf Hitler to get his country out of the misery that they were in for several years because of the Treaty of Versailles and the Great Depression. Okay, so I'm not going to get into this exercise, but one of Hitler's major objectives upon coming to power was to create jobs for 6 million unemployed Germans who had elected him chancellor, or who would become chancellor, but there was disagreement about where these jobs would be created. Okay, So what we're going to take a look at is, what did they actually do? Okay, so the number of unemployed people in Germany came down very quickly after 1933. As soon as Hitler was become chancellor, he immediately put them back to work. 6 million people were unemployed, and now in 1934, he dropped that by almost, well, 2.2 million people would go to work immediately. The number went down in 1939 when there was only 300,000 who were unemployed. So take a look at those numbers. He had put, when you consider that there were people now having children again, that he would reduce the unemployment numbers by 6 million people. Would that make a big difference in Germany? Absolutely, huge. The quality of life would increase dramatically under Adolf Hitler's Germany. Okay, so what do we have here? You can take a look from 6 million all the way down in 1939, all the way down to 300,000. Pretty darn impressive. Okay, short-term measures, the RAD and the DAF. Let's take a look at these, guys. Okay, National Labor Service, or the RAD. Hitler's first measure to tackle unemployment was to set up the National Labor Service to provide jobs that he had promised to the German people. Remember, this is so important that you understand why he was able to grab so much power so quickly and be able to keep it. And this was because of German employment. If he was unable to supply employment and to put food on the table and to increase the efficiency of the German political and industrial machine, people wouldn't have done it for him. The fact is, when you have a leader that does this and keeps his promises like this, puts food on your table when none was there before, gives you a job, gives you clean clothing, and a lot of it, enable you to buy a house, he becomes a good guy in your life. This organization gives men jobs in public service. For example, schools, hospitals, motorways, drainage ditches, sewer systems, electrical grids. These are what they call infrastructure developments. Hitler would set a massive goal into completely rebuilding Germany. And he did. Men in the RAD had to wear a uniform and live and work in camps. Their wages were really only pocket money, but for many, this was an improvement, dramatic improvement, where there was no work before. And many of them got free food. So what would people do? Their dads, or the men of the country, they would go work on these public projects, and their money was sent home for the wife and kids. Okay, the German Labor Front, the DAF, within months of taking power, Hitler decided to abolish all trade unions and in their place set up German Labor Front, run by Dr. Robert Ley. Its rules included, very simply, bosses could no longer sack workers on the spot. Workers could not leave a job without the government's permission. How about that? They couldn't leave without government permission. Wow. Okay, only government-run labor exchanges could arrange new jobs. Workers could no longer bargain for higher wages. That was all done for them. Strikes were made illegal. In fact, they were considered criminal under Hitler's regime. If you decided that you wanted to strike and not work, you would probably be put to death. Limitations on the hours a person could work. Many Germans were working 60 to 72 hours a week by the end of 1939. But remember, for the work that they did, they got paid. But remember, as they began to get paid, the German economy began to improve dramatically. Therefore, the wages would continue to go up. Interestingly enough, as a result of all these policies, at the end of 1936, I think I mentioned this before, the German economy was so good and they had rebuilt so much so quickly that the city of Berlin, Germany, the capital of Germany, was now the site of the 1936 Olympics. It was such an impressive achievement that people were invited all over the world, could see the improvements of not only the German economy, but the German people, as well as their infrastructure and their cities. Very, very impressive. Unemployment, the limits of success, the unemployment figures for Nazi Germany looked very impressive, but they don't really tell the whole story. Remember, propaganda was a big, big part of what was making this German machine run. 1933, women were no longer included in the unemployment figures. Once the Nazis came to power, most Jews were sacked. They were fired. Their jobs were given to other Germans. From 1935, Jews could no longer hold German citizenship and were removed from the unemployment register. They were simply just removed from Germany, figuratively as well as rationally, by the German people. The unemployment were obligated to take any job offered, or else they were classified as work shy and were imprisoned, which basically means that if you don't work, you're going to go to jail. Okay, so you didn't have much of a choice. The conscription removed over 1 million young men from the employment market. Conscription, that basically means that they are going to put you in the German military. So they're going to take you like a draft, and you had no choice. If the SS, your German government wanted you to go into the army, you had no choice. Over 1 million young men were conscripted and taken off the unemployment and put into the German military. Okay. Butter. Agricultural dealt with by Hugenberg and Dare. Industry dealt with by Helgemeyer, Schacht, and the New Plan. Basically what that means is butter equals consumer goods. This is what they were concerned with. The more butter, that's a figurative speech class, or basically food. This is how they were going to deal with it. Agriculture. How are we going to feed all these people? World food prices had been low for decades, which meant Germany had been importing cheap food from abroad. This was because the German farmers could not sell their food at a price that would enable them to make a good living. This meant that Germany was usually importing more than it exported, resulting in an unhealthy balance of trade. In other words, a mounting national debt. This would change. Moreover, dependence on imports were preventing Germany from achieving economic self-sufficiency, by which Hitler felt it necessary in order to prepare German economy for war. Okay, this was kind of the things that he was talking about, that he's going to do this to prepare the German people. Okay, how did agricultural policies affect German farmers? Okay, successes. This is exactly what happened. Farmers saw their incomes increase by 40% between 1928 and 1938. That's unprecedented. Why did they do it? Because Hitler realized that a dependent on foreign food is a weakness to the German people and a burden to its economy. That would begin to change. He began to subsidize farming. Increased by 20% food production between 1928 and 1938, leaving Germans self-sufficient in bread, grains, potatoes, sugar, meat, vegetables, and eggs. National priority for Germany is to grow and supply their own food. We don't want other food from other places into our economy. However, rich German people, who were very wealthy German people, would still begin to import certain wines and cheeses and stuff like that from France. But still, though, they wanted an emphasis at that time to be able to have their own agricultural built up, simply because it would add to the German economy. It would bring more jobs and stronger economy because of those jobs. Remember, when people make their own money and begin to accumulate money, they spend it, thereby expanding the German economy through a demand system. Now, class, this is something very important. And I'm going to do a little bit of compare and contrast right now, because while all this was going on in Germany, as you can see, their economy was beginning to take off. They were having great success. But in other parts of the world, they were still in very bad economic shape because of the Great Depression. Now, I'm going to look at the United States for just a moment, because this is very important to understand as a comparative analysis about how Germany actually was doing and what happened to the German people as a result. If you were a German person at this point and you saw all the successes, your loyalty to Hitler would be almost unfathomable. You would be completely absorbed in the fact that this guy brought food, he brought success, he brought jobs, he brought the economy back to where it was before and much further beyond. So Hitler's strength on its people, his grip on power, was now to the point where he was considered almost a living god. Now, in the United States, on the other hand, though, we had another world leader by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He would come to the power as the president of the United States the same year that Hitler would be given the chancellorship of Germany. In 1933, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was actually sworn in as president in 1933, he promised the American people very similar to what Adolf Hitler did. Hitler promised jobs through propaganda, through manipulation, through fear, and absolute power. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, promised the American people a New Deal. We live in a democracy in this country. We give people the freedom of choice. We don't scare people. We don't threaten people. We simply give them a choice. But the American president said, look, I understand very clearly, we've had a chance to look at this, that the American people need a New Deal. We're going to do something very similar to what Hitler did, which is what he did. In the first 100 days of his administration, Franklin Delano Roosevelt created over 100 different government agencies to assist the American people in getting employment, keeping employment, and rebuilding the American economy. This was done through great programs like the WPA, which is the Works Progress Administration, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which would bring electrical and water projects all over the southeastern part of the United States. They had the Rocky Mountain projects. They had the power grids all over the West, including the Hoover Dam, ecological projects, farm buyback programs, everything they could think of, new roads, new bridges, new schools, to rebuild the United States, or actually not to rebuild the United States, but to build the United States. So it was the same type of things that the Americans were doing as well as Adolf Hitler. The difference, though, similarities were obvious, but the differences, though, is that the way how they were done. The contrast was that the American economy was done by volunteer, not by avenues of threat and intimidation. Also, the American geographical boundaries of the United States are way larger than Germany. In fact, you could probably put about 10 Germanys into the American continental lower 48 states. So obviously you could see very clearly that the United States was a much larger country and it had a much broader base to deal with. But these are some of the things that were important, though. But I strongly believe that Adolf Hitler and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at some point, many people believe that maybe they even actually talked to each other about how they're going to solve the economy. It's interestingly enough, and people have actually speculated, maybe they did talk to each other. Their approaches were similar, but the results were obviously much, much different. Hitler would bring the German people absolute destruction on his policies eventually, because when we get talking about the World War II years, obviously something was really terrible that would happen to Germany as a result, as a direct result of Adolf Hitler's policies. But what I want to get to, class, is that because of this way that the German people were now being, I'm going to say probably the way that they were being treated, if you were an Aryan German, was nothing short of spectacular. As long as you showed your alliance, your allegiance, and your full-fledged love of Hitler, you were taken care of. You were doing very well for your family. You had employment. You had always had a job, and you had, most importantly, you had food on the table and hope in your heart. This was not true for everybody in Germany, though. And this is what is so sad about it, because a many part of the German people were persecuted and put in jail if you had any inkling to deny or to criticize Adolf Hitler. People want to criticize an American president. That's their right under the First Amendment of the US Constitution. You don't have freedom of speech in Nazi Germany, class. If you spoke out against Nazi Germany, you were in very big trouble. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the things that didn't quite work out the way that they wanted to work out. Some of the failures of these agricultural policies. Farmers came to resent the interference of the Reich food estate. These people were told what to grow, when to grow it, where to grow it, and why to grow it. And they were losing financial control over their own land. This now was being produced for the people of Germany through the Nazi Party. So much for being an independent farmer. The Nazis are now going to control food production by means of manipulating its farming and agricultural industry. Food production was still not at the level sufficient to feed the entire German population. Like I said, many people still relied on German imports. Basically, that was a lot from France and other parts of Europe and Italy. The fact is, they were not completely self-sufficient the way Hitler wanted them to be, so they had to go out and buy their other food. But the important thing here, though, class, is that they had the ability to do it. And that's what is important. People had money. And when you're rebuilding your military as fast as you possibly can, you are beginning to start to make some money and to accumulate money to go out and buy luxury items. Okay. The industrial solutions. Hitler appointed what they called Hausgemeinschaft as president of the Reichsbank. He quickly formulated a new plan which aimed to improve Germany's balance of trade. And what essentially they did was, well, let's take a look. Okay, it's not going to get me to that link, unfortunately. But what they did is that they began to take out huge amounts of debt by the Nazi Party in order to pay for many of their programs. But the programs were envisioned that they would pay for themselves through massive increases of employment, which in turn would pay taxes, which would pay down the debt. And this is a very delicate balance, because this is how governments get their money, by either they sell bonds or they tax their people. So this is by way of a tax scheme. Class, does anybody have any questions at this point? We're going to wrap this up in about 10 to 12 minutes, and I will be taking questions about all this. So if you have any questions at this point, ask them, and then I want to come back and finish this presentation today. So anybody have any questions at this point?
Yeah, Linya.
Hi, Linya, how are you?
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
Is there any proof that Hitler set the Reichstag fire, or is it still like a myth?
Okay, that's a very good question. There is really no proof. And Hitler didn't do it himself, but he had people stage it and then blame it on his enemies. But there was never any direct proof. But because of this thing we call propaganda, which is targeted media and print advertising and signage and all these things, they were blamed, and they have enough people saying otherwise that they were blamed for it. But there was actually never any proof.
Thank you for answering my question.
Of course.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi.
There is a question in the question and answer. Can you check it?
Okay. You say there was a question and answer?
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Oh, no.
I don't see anything here.
Wait a moment.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Q&A, there it is. Okay. Let's take a look. Okay, why did people pick Hitler if they know he was doing all the things kind of stupid, not something that he should do? Okay, the reason that the people didn't pick Adolf Hitler, okay? Many of the people would agree with Hitler because they wanted to do good things for Germany, but a lot of the German people did not want Hitler, but he was put there as a resort so the government could keep the power. They were afraid of absolute anarchy if they didn't have some sort of structure because the economy and the situation of Germany was so bad. But he was never really picked. He was maneuvered into the chancellorship, and then he would just simply assume power by propaganda and military successes and these political rallies. Okay, now the next question is, did USA do better than Germany or worse? Okay, that's a very good question. The American people would actually do not as well at the beginning of it because Germany and Hitler, what they were doing involved a much smaller country with a smaller number of people. But the United States, after World War II, would basically be the #1 superpower of the world, where Germany would end up completely wiped out. Hitler would lead his people to absolute destruction. And we'll get into that when we get into the war years. But after World War II, Hitler and Germany were dead, and the United States emerged as the world's leading superpower. Next question is, okay, answer that. Okay, if people realized that Hitler was taking a wrong path in order to bring the country back to power, why didn't those other politicians and political leaders who had power lead those people to actual rebellion against the Nazi acts? That's a very good question. Okay, Daniel Lee, yeah, you got a very good question, young man. Simply because what opposition? If there was any opposition, it had better be in somebody's basement. Because as Hitler became more and more power, more and more people were beginning to follow him. And more people, remember, military was growing, the Nazi party was growing, and it got to the point where if you had even thought about going against the Nazi party, you were put into a concentration camp and summarily executed. You became an enemy of the German people. You became the enemy of the Third Reich and the personal problem of the Fuhrer. If you know what's good for you, you will join the Nazi party. If you don't, you're considered an enemy of the state and you risk going to jail and being murdered. And this is exactly why Hitler became as powerful as he did, as fast as he did. He became successful, and now since he got power, he's going to keep it. And I mean, people were walking down the street saluting the Nazi salute. And if you didn't do that, you risked going to jail just for not saluting. So it was a masterpiece of manipulation and propaganda. Okay, good questions, everybody. Very good questions. Okay, let's continue this because I want to be able to finish this PowerPoint today before we get into the war years that were coming up. But first, we're going to take a look at the Jewish problem next time. We're going to talk a little bit about what was going on with the Jewish nation. So let's get going. Okay. Okay, went through that. Let's take a look at guns. Okay, Hermann Goering, rearmament and the 4-year plan. Guns equals rearmament. First thing they did was rearm the German nation, as we said. Now remember, after the Treaty of Versailles ending World War I, Germany was not able to have an army, very limited navy, zero air force, and was stripped of all of their overseas possessions, and they were not given any latitude to do anything. Well, Hitler said, well, I'm not going to follow that because we didn't negotiate it. It was unfair, and I don't really care about the Treaty of Versailles. Let them try to stop us. And for that, Hitler was right. The German people deserved to have their own destiny of what they would want to do. And any other country would have done the same thing. Okay, rearmament was very important to Adolf Hitler. He was determined to make Germany ready for war again, if needed at this point. if needed. He wanted to conquer the Ukraine and use its resources to make Germany self-sufficient for food and raw materials. However, rearmament was forbidden under the Treaty of Versailles, so Hitler had to conceal his actions from the Allies. Well, that didn't work very much longer. At one point, he decided, I'm not going to conceal it anymore. I don't care what they think, because at this point, after 1936 and after he put on the Olympics, he put on a show for the world about what he had done. Now he didn't care about what they thought, because he knew at that point that he was way ahead of the rest of Europe in rearmament and technology and capability of a war. The last thing Europe wanted, class, was to be in another war. Hitler was now bringing Germany to where they were much stronger than they were at the beginning of even World War I. Because spending had to be concealed, a lot of the work was hidden, or what they call the creation program. Building new runways, barracks and motorways, autobahns. These were all public works projects designed to support the military. Like I said, at first he had to be kind of sneaky about it, but then after 1936, he didn't care what they thought. He was going to rebuild Germany, and there was nothing anybody could do to stop him. Okay, we're almost done here, class. Okay, here we go. Hitler signals his decision to move away from butter and towards guns in 1935. He had already rebuilt most of his agricultural industry. Now we're going to concentrate on finishing up the military. He had already introduced it. He introduced compulsory service for German young men and set up an air force, strictly forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles. At this point, he didn't care. Schleicher resigned the following year when Goebbels launched his own, which demanded and called for, which would be preparing Germany for possible war. Hitler understood very clearly that if he's going to conquer and retake Austria and eventually Czechoslovakia, he better be prepared for war, and he was. The other people in Europe, the other countries in Europe, they saw exactly what was happening, and they said, look, we don't want this. Let him have Austria back. Let him have parts of Czechoslovakia back. It was Germany's before the war anyway. There's nothing we can do to stop him. And the last thing we want to do is get into another war, because many parts of Europe was still in an economic depression that had been gripping most of the other parts of the world for, at this point, close to 8 years. So they just didn't want to do it. The army grew from 100,000 men to 1.4 million men. These soldiers needed equipping, so there were 46 billion marks, which were spent on weapons and equipment, creating thousands of jobs in the arms industry. Okay, this was huge. Remember, as these people were making these weapons and all these planes and all these tanks, they were creating wealth for the German people. Obviously, doing these military service did not count as unemployed, so he took 1.3 million off the unemployment register and put them in as workers or in the military. However, Schleicher argued that the policy was not providing long-term stability, but merely gearing the German towards another catastrophic European war, in which case he was right. Hitler didn't care what he thought, because he believed that no one would oppose him. Well, that was one of Hitler's great miscalculations, was that Europe was beginning to see what he was doing, and they drew the proverbial line in the sand. Adolf Hitler, and we're going to get into this next time, class, you can have Austria. He walked into Austria unopposed. In fact, the people in Austria were cheering of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler coming into Vienna and taking over Austria. And as soon as he did, what is the first thing he did? When he took over Austria, he rounded up the Jews, put them in jail. He also rounded up dissidents and any political oppositions and put them in jail. What's important to understand, though, class, is that this was done as and after the Night of Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht, in 1938. And this is what we're going to go over next time with regards to what was happening on the domestic side of all this. Hitler would rebuild his military, rebuild his agriculture, rebuild his industries, but he was also taking away a lot of people from Germany because he simply didn't want them there. To flush out all the impurities so Germany would have their Aryan race. Okay. That's it. This is over, this last one. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, there is a question in
Okay,
chat box.
question and answer. Okay, we have. Would you mention the USA president back then did something similar? Do you think Trump in doing something similar? No, I think President Trump is trying to do the right thing. In fact, many people don't understand that President Trump is a very, very avid historian. He's a very, very smart guy in history. What Hitler was doing was for the German people, but he was doing it under force. Roosevelt was doing it under completely voluntary a democracy. Donald Trump was doing something that's very similar. He's trying to create, and he did create, a lot of employment for the American people. The stock market increased dramatically, and there was a lot of people that went back to work under Donald Trump. There was nothing wrong with what Donald Trump was doing and had been doing, but the media doesn't like President Trump. And there's a lot to that. It was not an inappropriate question. By all means, it was a very appropriate question. Okay, the next one I see here is, okay, did something similar to Hitler. Yeah, okay. Yeah, like I said, Donald Trump is a businessman. He's a president who is a businessman. He's not a politician. And that's one of the reasons why people don't like him in the US government and American media. They're used to being a politician, a system of way things are done out there. Hitler did something what he wanted to do his own way, didn't care about the media. Donald Trump, on the other hand, if you want to compare and contrast, does care about the media, but the media don't like him because he's an outsider. And that's why they don't like him. He's different, but he has made a significant difference for the American people. And you'll just have to look at the numbers to prove that. Okay. Class, I have got to go to another class. Does anybody have any last questions for me? I got to wrap this up. Nobody?
You see Earth's question?
Anybody have any else? Okay, that's all I have. Oh, here we go. Okay, I don't think it is inappropriate. Yeah, it's not. Okay. Okay, yeah, it's definitely not an inappropriate question. Okay, class, next time we're going to look at the later part of Germany in the 1930s. We're going to take a look at the Jewish, what they call the Jewish problem, the persecution of the Jewish people, and the annexation of Austria, and the basically not annexation, but takeover of Czechoslovakia, which would lead to World War II. Europe was getting very antsy about this. They said, look at Germany, Adolf Hitler, you can take and annex Austria and Czechoslovakia. Those were yours before World War I. But if you go into Poland, we're going to have a big problem. And that's where we're going to stop you from doing it. What do you think Hitler did? He did it because he didn't think Europe could stop him. And that's when what would roll into World War II. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining me. Good class tonight. We went over a lot of stuff. I hope you learned something. Your teacher, Annie, administration, they have these PowerPoints, so thank you very much.